What makes the Permian a key period in our planet's history? Can we say that the Permian had a truly significant impact on our contemporary world? Apart from the fact that the Permian closes the entire Paleozoic system, which stretches from around 542 to 252 million years ago, i.e. almost 290 million years, this pivotal period also marks a new era of change in terms of climate, geology, and biodiversity. Dear traveler, welcome. Today we're embarking on an exceptional journey back to the time of the first reptiles. What happened during the Permian? What plant and animal species populated the Earth then? What terrestrial upheavals did they have to face? But before you set off on your next adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing. Thank you and have a great trip! When we embark on such an important time journey, it's not enough to know where we are, but what period of time we're in. We need to situate ourselves in the past so that we can put events into context and understand them better. The Permian is the very last period of the Paleozoic Era. This era is subdivided into 6 major systems. It begins with the Cambrian, continues with the Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, and Carboniferous, and ends with the Permian. So we've reached the apogee of the Paleozoic, or the moment of its downfall, depending on how you look at it. The Permian began around 299 million years ago and lasted until 252 million years ago, a total period of almost 50 million years. During this period, there were multiple changes, sufficiently significant to enable the Permian era to be divided into 3 distinct periods. These are the Lower Permian, also known as the Ciceralian, the Middle Permian, also known as the Guadalupian, and the Upper Permian, also known as the Lopingian. The Permian owes its name to the Perm region, a Russian province where the very first fossil site from this period was discovered. The Paleozoic period was a period of many twists and turns. After an explosion of life in the ocean in the Cambrian, the planet suffered mass extinctions twice, at the end of the Ordovician and then at the end of the Devonian. Each time nature took over. Through radiation and evolution, flora and fauna managed to adapt to new conditions. During the Devonian, and even more so during the Carboniferous, a new revolution was underway. Plants were able to colonize the continent's soil. Several species took advantage of this new plant cover to conquer the land and leave the aquatic world behind. This vegetation favors great diversification, offering new ecological niches for many species. But nature is never completely stable. Geological and climatic changes force it to renew itself, again and again. Each stage brings us a little closer to the world we know today. One of these stages was the Permian. The various evolutionary processes that began in the Carboniferous period will come into their own during this very special era. But before we can tackle these essential changes together, we need to understand how space evolved over these millions of years and what terrestrial activities left their mark on our planet. This is the starting point and raison d'etre of these adaptive evolutions. By studying these changes, we can better understand how flora and fauna have responded to them. During our previous trips, we talked about the formation of a unique continent, a slow formation spanning several periods of the Paleozoic. The Permian is, if we can put it that way, the golden age of this unique continent, Pangaea. It was during this period that its formation was at its most complete. It stretches almost from pole to pole, which seems quite improbable given the positions of today's continents. Seen from the sky, this enormous continent looks like a small piece of land lost in the middle of a vast ocean, the Panthalassa. It seems to stretch on forever. Despite its imposing presence and vast territory, when Pangaea was formed, it left a small part of itself behind. To better understand what happened, let's look at the Earth as a whole. Over the course of 50 million years, the Permian experienced numerous upheavals and a changing climate. Temperature variations, rainfall, but also extreme seasons. As you can see from these images, the climate becomes very marked depending on the region, but also very different from what we saw during the Carboniferous. Remember the Earth's previous activities, the strong colonization of plants and the fall of coal-bearing forests led to the formation of an ice cap on Gondwana at the South Pole and a great general cooling. This glaciation lasted until the lower Permian. This marked the transition from an ice age to a period of intense heat. A veritable furnace was activated on Earth. The change was radical, to say the least. If the ice sheet, the frozen land at the South Pole, persisted until now, it also eventually disappeared. The mercury is skyrocketing on the blue planet. A large part of the Pangaea continent is becoming almost desert-like. The vast swamps of the Carboniferous period disappeared, giving way to savanna, a drier, more arid landscape. Tropical regions became increasingly rare. As this massive vegetation disappeared, oxygen levels fell, while carbon levels rose. But this is not the only upheaval our planet is experiencing. As we have seen, the ice caps are melting. A vicious circle has now set in. Heat melts glaciers. Glaciers no longer play their role as shields. That's right, the sun's reflection. Until now, this was one of their essential functions in maintaining climatic stability. The less ice there is, the less the reverberation slows down the sun, and the more ice melts, the warmer the Earth becomes. It's endless. As a result of these multiple causes, we are gradually entering a real geological and climatic upheaval, to which flora and fauna will have to adapt if they are to survive. Not all will succeed, but new species better adapted to this new era will emerge. They will be able to take advantage of these new living conditions. A few minutes ago, we talked about the formation of Pangaea. As you can imagine, this famous continental waltz has undoubtedly had far-reaching consequences on the course of Earth's history. This planisphere shows the movement of the continental masses. This movement will lead to a multitude of changes, such as the formation of mountain ranges, but also of the seabed. As you can imagine, such plate movements have a major impact, both on land and in the open sea. One of the great events of the Permian was the creation of a new ocean, the Tethys. Its name comes from one of the Titanids of Greek mythology, daughter of Gaia and Uranos. The second important event is, as we were just saying, the formation of mountain ranges. What we're going to see now is that the ocean and mountains can be linked. The movement of plates leads to what is known as subduction. When two tectonic plates meet, the phenomenon lasts for a very long time. The result is not a sudden head-on collision, but rather a sliding of plates. One, often the thinner marine plate, slides under the thicker terrestrial plate. The Hercynian chain is of considerable size. It may even be the largest terrestrial chain the Earth has ever known. It is between 3,000 and 7,000 kilometers long, or between 1,900 and 4,400 miles, and nearly 700 kilometers, or 435 miles wide. Its remnants can be found in France, notably in the Vosges and massive central regions. If they are no longer as prestigious in these regions as they once were, it's because these mountains have eroded over time. This mountain range is important not only because of its imposing size, but also because of the major role it played during the Permian period. Like the Himalayas today, or the Andes on the other side of the world, mountains of such height block clouds. They therefore trigger a system of heavy precipitation throughout the region surrounding these mountains, and a great demarcation on either side of them. On one side is a hot, humid climate, where the rains are held back. On the other, the climate is dry and arid. No clouds, no rain reaches this side of the mountain. These changes force the flora and fauna to adapt to a dry, arid climate. This is how a savanna landscape gradually takes root, or how certain species adopt a new way of life through different episodes of radiation, for example. Now that we've talked about mountains, it's time to talk about the marine world, and above all, to understand the link between them. In the Carboniferous period, the beginnings of this new marine territory were already taking shape. By moving closer together, by succeeding, the land masses enclose part of the Panthalassa in the hollow of their arms. They encircled this small piece of Panthalassa Ocean, which then became Tethys. Over the millennia, and as continents have moved, Tethys's place on our planet has changed considerably, but traces of its presence can still be found today. It's the Mediterranean Sea, but also mountains. That's right. Tethys was made up of shoals. These shoals, incredible as it may seem, have become the roofs of the world. Snow-capped peaks from the Himalayas in Asia to the Alps in Europe. We're going to land on the shores of this ocean and find out what's so special about it. Apart from this little anecdote about the remnants of Tethys's past, also known as Paleothys, this ocean is really a very special Permian body of salt water. Because of its position and encirclement, it became a veritable marine breeding ground. Life exploded and diversified within it. Thousands of species hatch in this blue jewel box. But why? Why here more than anywhere else? The Tethys Ocean is considered a veritable marine breeding ground. In some respects, it's as if we were in the Cambrian, a pivotal period during which life never ceased to enrich, develop, and diversify. Thousands of species found, all the conditions they needed here. I'd now like to ask you a question. Why do you think the Paleothys seabed is more conducive to this important diversification of marine species than the rest of the vast Panthalassa? What changes the situation? closure by land is not the only reason. The answer lies at the top of these mountains. In fact, it's the erosion of these great mountain ranges that carries so much sediment into the ocean. These sediments are the preferred source of nutrients for aquatic plants and marine microorganisms. The base of the food chain is enriched by a new nutrient source, and the whole chain benefits. Let's start by taking the chain back to its base. Fusilians appear on the seabed. These fusilians are small marine organisms. These little grains of wheat are the famous fusilians. They are unicellular organisms. In other words, a single, highly complex cell performs all the basic functions of life. Fusilians secrete calcium carbonate from the protoplasm, the cell's living material, to form the hard shell and its various chambers. Other small organisms like this will enrich the seabed, creating a new ecological niche. Corals also spread widely, enriching the ecosystem by providing shelter for these multiple marine species. There were two main groups in the Permian, Tabulata and Rugosa. Their calcite exoskeletons favored the diversification of other marine species. Sponges, equally adept at architecture, also form numerous reefs. Unlike corals, which are built from calcium carbonate, sponges are made of silica. They are colonial and, above all, filter feeders. Some species are very large, like Gigantospongia, which can reach 2 meters or 7 feet. Gertiocelia forms long branches like corals but is really a sponge. Brachiopods, but also cephalopods, goniotites, and nautilus will once again diversify and enrich their genus with new species. Here we can see a nautiloid, Cuperoceras. As in the Carboniferous, brachiopods and echinoderms carpet the seabed, but look how numerous they are. They come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. Here are Leptidus brachiopods, and next to them, Edriostegus. Further up the reef, Spirifer brachiopods. Various marine plants, microorganisms, and the famous sediments from the mountains help all these species to expand, with mollusks, brachiopods, crustaceans, and even sponges and corals benefiting from these new living conditions. The base of the food chain is therefore rich, diversified, and abundant. With the abundance of food available, the species that feed on them also proliferate. Let's move on up the water column. We find gonionites, but they're not the only ones swimming in this water column. Have you noticed how many fish there are here? Just ahead of us is a whole shoal of Platysomus. A little further on, Dorypterus. The fish live here by the thousands. When prey is so plentiful, predators respond. They act as regulators. It's one of the oldest laws of nature. With so much choice on the menu, predators have also diversified. Some are large, others very powerful. Let's discover them without further ado. Do you remember who was at the top of the marine food chain in the Carboniferous period? Yes, sharks. Or to be precise, chondrichthyans, a cousin of today's sharks. They became the kings of the ocean when, at the end of the Devonian period, the placoderms disappeared. That didn't change much during the Permian. Quite the contrary, in fact. They continued their ascent to establish themselves as major marine predators. Hybotus conquered both fresh and saltwater. This member of the Hypodontes reigns supreme over the aquatic world. It looks a little less like the sharks we have come to expect, but they too are chondrichthyans alongside Hybotus. These are the xenocanths. Xenocanthus has a ribbon-like dorsal fin that runs the length of its back. You may have noticed its large spine pointing backwards from the head. Scientists are still struggling to determine the purpose of this famous spine. Some think it may have been venomous, making it easier to hunt the crustaceans and fish it feeds on. In a completely different vein, I'd like to introduce you to Genasa bituminosa. This is a pedalodonte. It has a very distinctive shape. It looks a bit like our modern-day stingrays. Genasa bituminosa feeds on all the marine shells we encountered earlier, in particular, the many brachiopods that abound on the ocean floor. Finally, I'd also like to tell you about the enigmatic Helicoprion. It too feeds on these mollusks, crustaceans, and brachiopods. But to do so, he has a rather unusual weapon. Helicoprion is a eugeniodon fish. Although it looks a little like a shark, it's not. It measures up to 10 meters or 33 feet. Its dental whorls reach up to 40 centimeters or 15 inches in diameter. This spiral dentition is truly astonishing. It is undoubtedly an adaptation for feeding on soft-bodied prey and may have functioned as a shelling mechanism for hard-bodied cephalopods such as nautiloids and ammonoids. In a word, it's a real shell crusher. Perhaps it's time to go up to the surface and see what's going on in plants and vertebrates. There have been many changes. Carboniferous plants were largely spore plants. In other words, they needed water to develop and maximize their chances of reproduction. A few seed plants have begun to appear, but their presence is still timid on the continent. Most of them reproduce by sporangia. This is the case of Sigillaria and Lepidodendron, which were very common during the Carboniferous system. As we have seen, swamps are drying up in some regions. The land is gradually becoming an oven. If the soil gets drier and drier, water can no longer serve as a channel for spore-forming plants. What's more, these plants acclimatize to a humid rather than tropical environment, rather than to arid soil and dry air, not to mention reproduction, find it increasingly difficult to find sufficient energy to grow and develop. The forest of these arborescent plants is dying a slow death. These new, extremely difficult conditions have taken their toll. They're disappearing. On the other hand, one group of plants managed to survive in this seemingly hostile environment during the Permian. These are the bare-seeded plants known as gymnosperms. Remember their timid appearance in the Carboniferous? Well, the least we can say is that in the Permian, they became much more widespread on the continent. These include, but are not limited to, the famous seed ferns. Let's take a closer look. At the end of the Carboniferous period, they gradually began to colonize the Earth's soil. This was only the beginning of their colonization, of course, as spore-bearing plants were already on conquered ground, so it was difficult for them to find a place for themselves in this dense, lush plant cover. But when drought came knocking on the door of this entirely water-dependent forest, spores were forced to give way. The conifers will take advantage of the vacant space and take over the land, but not just anywhere. As you know, the climate has undergone many changes over the course of the Earth's history. Depending on where you are on the globe, you won't find the same temperatures. On either side of the mountains, you can find rather humid zones, or arid lands. There are also more temperate zones with clearly defined seasons. The conifer family will not develop in the same way everywhere, depending on the region. The Walchia conifer, for example, establishes itself in the north. Walchia piniformis is a conifer somewhere between Cyprus and Araucaria, a large conifer in the Andes. The cone-shaped fruits are the source of this family's distinctive name. To the south, we find the Glossopteridales. These trees can reach 30 meters or 100 feet in height. The wood of their trunks and branches has rings, similar to those of some of our contemporary species. These rings are invaluable witnesses, as they enable scientists to confirm one thing. In these temperate zones, the climate has clear-cut seasons. To adapt to these sometimes extreme changes, these trees have adopted a new strategy: deciduous leaves. At the same time, cycads also appeared. They are considered to be close to conifers despite their deceptive appearance as a cross between a fern and a palm. The reason they are so close to conifers is that they too contain the various reproductive organs which are located at the heart of the leaf crown in the form of a modified leaf cone known as a strobile. The cycadophytes, follicularis, and Cycadophytes granulatus, found here, are only just beginning to colonize the soil. In the Mesozoic, the Cycadales group expanded. This great diversification of trees and zonation of plants enabled new ecological niches to emerge. New evolutionary radiations are underway. As we saw at the end of the Carboniferous period, amphibians gave rise to amniotes, animals capable of laying eggs with shells. Without this ability, these amphibians were completely dependent on the aquatic environment. Indeed, amphibians had legs to move around and lungs to breathe. All they lacked was the assurance of being able to protect their offspring on land. Until now, amphibians had to lay their eggs in water. To free themselves completely from this element, they had to update their mode of reproduction. The amniote class has the ability to lay eggs with a shell and amniotic fluid inside. The amniotic egg enables embryos to develop serenely on the Earth's surface. It can withstand air pressure and any microshocks on Earth. But evolution didn't stop there. These amniotes were to define the major evolutionary lines of the Permian. They defined the new face of fauna in the era that closed the Paleozoic. They gave rise to new clades, the sauropsids and synapsids. We'll come back to the latter in a moment. These two branches are undoubtedly descended from two species that we had the opportunity to crossbreed during the Carboniferous. At the very end of the Carboniferous, to be precise. For the sauropsid branch, it's Hylonomus laeli. For the synapsid branch, It's Archaeopteryx florensis. Between them, they gave rise to many of the terrestrial species that populated the continent in the Permian. Over the millions of years of the late Carboniferous and the three periods that define the Permian, species evolved and diversified. The path of this evolution, and what it will lead to, is very interesting to observe. Before discussing the emergence of synapsids and sauropsids, it's important to understand and differentiate certain technical terms that define their characteristics. Those of particular interest to us are those used to classify amniote skulls according to the number and position of temporal windows: anapsid, synapsid, euryapsid, and diapsid. When several species are subjected to the same environmental constraints and ecological niches, they will independently adopt several similar physiological, morphological, and sometimes even behavioral traits. This is known as convergent evolution. The different temporal windows mentioned earlier are part of this type of evolutionary convergence. Depending on their environment, but also their ecological niche and therefore their diet, each of these species has evolved according to its own needs. The temporal window houses the temporal masticatory muscles. The strength and position of these muscles respond to a particular need, depending on the diet and type of prey, for example. The contribution made by the different bones to the edges of these temporal windows varies from group to group. When we speak of anapsids or parareptiles, as the term anapsid is controversial among some scientists, we are referring to a group of amniotes that have no temporal fossa. Synapsids are reptiles with skulls pierced by a single, lower temporal window. Finally, diapsids have two. The diapsid skull is characterized by the presence of upper and lower temporal fossae. According to recent research, these same diapsids, despite their two pits, may have become euryapsids or anapsids. Both may have lost one of the pits during their evolution. The term euryapsid is also controversial, as its meaning is ambiguous. It can refer to all amniotes with an upper temporal window, or only to direct descendants of the first diapsids. The euryapsid form corresponds to the presence of upper temporal fossae only. Now that the shape of their skulls holds no secrets for you, let's take a closer look at their morphology, ecological niche, and various characteristics. Pelycosaurs are many and varied. They come in all shapes and sizes. Pelycosaurs include several families, such as Cassidae, Varanopatae, Ophiocodontidae, Edaphosauridae, Eotherididae, and Sphenacodontidae. What do they have in common? They all belong to the mammalian branch. We call them mammalian reptiles, although today we prefer the term pre-mammalian. Among them is the famous Dimetrodon, Sphenacodontidae. So here we are with our very first synapsid. It's quite something. Perhaps given its morphology and appearance, you're thinking that we forgot to specify one thing, the emergence of the first dinosaurs. But no, we haven't forgotten anything. Dimetrodon isn't a dinosaur. It's a reptile. The big difference between the two is that all dinosaurs, or sauropsids, have two pairs of temporal fossae, whereas Dimetrodon has only one. Dinosaurs will appear 40 million years later, so we'll have to be patient. Dimetrodon is therefore a synapsid, not a sauropsid. It's also a quadruped with a very special feature, its dorsal sail. It's impossible to confuse or miss it in the middle of this sparse wetland plain with such a fan on its back. The usefulness of this sail is still a matter of debate. Many scientists have studied the subject and are still trying to unravel the mystery of this singular physical attraction. It may be that the sail plays a thermoregulatory role, evacuating heat or, on the contrary, capturing it to warm the rest of the body. Others, however, suggest that it's more a means of courtship to seduce the opposite sex. Unless, according to the latter, it's simply a useful means of stabilizing the skeleton, and in particular the spine. Let's take a look at the rest of his skeleton and morphology. Its skull is high and curved, with large teeth of varying sizes set along the length of the jaws. There's no doubt about its diet. It's a perfect carnivore. Its favorite prey is fish, but it's not averse to a small tetrapod, a reptile, or even an amphibian. It shares its ecosystem with animals such as Archaea, Diplocalus, Eriops, Captorhinus, and Edaphosaurus. Dimetrodon is a synapsid belonging to the sphenacodont clade. Not all sphenacodonts have a veil like Dimetrodon. Haptidus, for example, also belongs to the sphenacodont clade. It looks more like a huge chameleon. Also a quadruped, its tail is as long as its body. Now here is an Edaphosaurus from the Edaphosauridae family. This time we're dealing with a herbivore. We should even call it a vegetivore to avoid any confusion. We often speak of herbivores as opposed to meat eaters, but herbivore means eating grass. Grass was not present in the Permian. There is a multitude of plants, of course, as we have seen and will soon see again on this trip, and vegetation has greatly developed and even evolved. But for the moment, it's still just plants of various shapes and sizes, not grass as such. Our Edaphosaurus, then, is a vegetarian, feeding on the plants it finds along the way. It is one of the oldest known herbivorous tetrapods. It measures between 1 meter or 3 feet and 3 meters or 7 feet, and weighs around 300 kilograms or 660 pounds. You'll notice that it too has a lovely dorsal sail. We could go on with our synapsid investigations and describe a few other species, but the most important thing to remember about this group is its evolution. The synapsids will give rise to the therapsid branch. In a few minutes you'll understand the importance of this group. In addition to the large Pelycosaur family, the synapsids gave rise to the therapsid family. These rapidly evolved and diversified. Just a few million years after the appearance of the first therapsids, a new branch of vertebrates was born. Let's take a look at these morphological evolutions by studying different species of Permian therapsids. The first therapsid I'd like to introduce you to belongs to the order Dinocephales. It's even a suborder of Tapinocephalus. This is Moscops. Yes, it's rather huge. It's almost 3 meters or 10 feet long and must weigh close to a ton. This semi-aquatic giant is an imposing plant eater. Knowing that plants don't provide much in the way of calories and energy, and given its huge dimensions, we estimate that it would need to eat over 100 kilograms or 220 pounds of leaves a day to meet its needs. As I was saying, it's semi-aquatic. By this I mean that Moschops lives a bit like our modern-day hippopotamuses. He is able to go on the ground but thrives in bodies of water. If its size is relatively exceptional, it's above all its gait that I'd like to highlight here. Until now, amphibians and parareptiles had a very arched, crawling gait, like many of today's reptiles. Here we're closer to a mammalian gait. The elbow joint, for example, offers a wider opening. The gait is therefore quite different. Another therapsid, much smaller but just as interesting to observe, is Lycanops. It measures around 1 meter and probably weighs no more than 50 kilograms or 33 pounds. But this doesn't stop it from being a very good hunter. He hunts prey within his reach, of modest size, such as a few sauropsids that we'll no doubt meet a little later, but also some members of his clade, small therapsids, notably diconodonts. Lycanops is an agile predator. Once again, I'd like to take a close look at its mode of movement. Like Moschops, it is far from having an arched, crawling gait typical of all the quadruped vertebrates we had encountered before them. In fact, it's quicker in its movements than anything we've seen before. Thanks to its long, close-to-the-body legs, it is more stable, and its movements seem easier, like quadruped mammals. Its mouth is a formidable weapon. It has a long, slender head, like the Canidae genus. But above all, it has fang-like teeth on both the upper and lower jaws. They act like daggers, they kill and tear. The flesh of this prey won't resist such perfectly sharp blades for long. In its mouth, it's probably a Robertia. It had the misfortune to fall under the fangs of the Lycanops. It does, however, provide an opportunity to evoke a new family of therapsids. Robertia is a therapsid that belongs to the diconodont family. In fact, it was one of the very first of its kind in the Middle Permian. It is a sort of primitive diconodont in the sense that it is one of the oldest in the branch. This little plant eater didn't stand a chance against Lycanops. The small canine teeth protruding from its upper jaw are only useful for cutting through the toughest stems. Once free, it can sever the stem with its horny beak and enjoy a well-deserved meal. Another member of the diconodont group we'll be looking at now is more imposing, measuring over 1 meter 20 or 4 feet on average. Also a vegetarian, it is not immune to carnivores despite its more respectable size. Predators are numerous here, powerful and ferocious. Diconodon has to be on his guard. As it cuts vegetation with its beak or uproots tubers and roots with its tusks, danger lurks. Before closing this part on the therapsids, I'd like to turn to the upper Permian with another family, the cynodonts. Procynosuchus is a semi-aquatic cynodont, as was Moschops. Measuring around 60 centimeters or 25 inches long, it appears to have the body of a crocodile and the head of a dog. It has a long tail, flat feet, and a long rounded head. In the water, it is perfectly at ease. Like an eel, it wriggles to swim. Its tail acts as a propeller in the water and is a great asset for gaining speed. But it's not all about the tail. Its legs are also very efficient in their own way. Its flat feet become paddles, And thanks to flexor muscles that can be identified by the ridges on the femur, it can bend and unfold its legs to increase thrust through the water. So that's all we can say about the therapsids. By now, you're probably wondering what's so important about therapsids. Well, when we introduced this group, I mentioned that this lineage was very important for the further evolution of living organisms. We didn't quite get to the bottom of it, but I did drop a few hints to put you on the right track, especially when we looked at the gait of certain animals, for example. Do you remember Lycanops? The movement was no longer reptilian, but tended more towards that of mammals. Have you guessed the key evolutionary step that led to therapsids? Therapsids give rise to a new branch, the mammals. These, in turn, gave rise to the mammals, a group that today occupies an important place on our planet. But it all began here in the Permian with the therapsids. In this second part on therapsids, rather than approaching these animals by family, we're going to discover them by period. In this way, you'll be able to see that in the lineage of the therapsids, the rapid evolution of these animals enabled the first morphological characteristics of mammals to be outlined in just a few thousand years. As its name suggests, Sphenacodon is a member of the Sphenacodontidae family, just like Dimetrodon or Haptidus, which introduced our synapsid group. We're in the lower Permian here. We're a long way from the characteristics you'd expect from a mammal. It adopts a much more reptilian morphology. It resembles a lizard, or more broadly, a reptile. It appeared in the upper Carboniferous and was still present in the lower Permian. At 3 meters long, it had very sharp teeth and was therefore a carnivore. Let's move on to the middle Permian. Let's start with Brachiosaurus. The silhouette and head shape are already less reptilian. The head is smaller than that of the Sphenacodontidae presented earlier. However, the temporal cleft is larger than in the latter. Also noticeable is the greater flare at the back of the skull, where the muscles are attached. This means that the muscles are larger, resulting in a stronger bite. It is also equipped with enlarged canines. Canines, biting muscles, a smaller head that's better proportioned to the rest of the body. We can already see that evolution is underway, although Brachiosaurus still retains some very primitive features. This is also true of the order Dinocephales. Their members include vegetarians, carnivores, and even omnivores. While some are exclusively terrestrial, others are semi-aquatic. Dinocephales have diversified greatly over the course of their presence on our planet. Although they are still very primitive, there have been some important changes. The ilium, for example, the upper part of the coxal bone, which along with the sacrum and coccyx enables movement of the pelvis, is now more elongated. Movement and gait are therefore more stable and comfortable. In carnivores, if we focus on the head, we can also see some changes, notably in the differentiation of teeth. Some at the front are longer and can shear. On the lower part, we can see that the teeth along the tongue interlock and are characterized by a crushing surface when the upper jaw meets the lower. Chewing can almost begin. Let's take a look at some therocephalons. Therocephalons are the closest relatives of the cynodonts that gave rise to mammals. A close look at the skull skeleton of one of them reveals the appearance of the secondary palate. It separates the nasal cavity from the oral cavity. This is a very common feature in mammals. Goronicus is a Therocephalus, like Goronicus macuatine and Goronicus sundarensis. Depending on the species, the upper dentition consisted of 4 to 5 incisors, a large saber-toothed canine, and 3 to 4 postcanines. The articulated cervical vertebrae, the posture of the legs under the belly, and the pelvis favor a more stable upright gait. In other words, the gait is more mammal-like than reptiliform. It's already time to continue our evolutionary journey by discovering the species of the upper Permian. Here are a few members of the Gorgonospians. One of them is an Inostransevia. It's the largest. It's close to Ursid size at 4 meters or 14 feet long and around 350 kilograms or 770 pounds. Its head is about 45 centimeters or 18 inches long, which is quite reasonable and proportional to the rest of the body. Its teeth, on the other hand, are very long, about 12 centimeters or 4 inches. This admirable length, however, is not so developed for all the teeth. Only the canines are. The others are specialized like ours, each with a particular shape depending on whether they cut, shear, or crush. They are gigantic and terribly frightening. However, if we put aside their monstrous appearance, their name comes from the Gorgons, the snake-haired women of Greek mythology. Then we can glimpse new, evolutionary stages. This mammalian reptile lived in the Siberian desert during the Permian Era, one of the driest periods of the Paleozoic Era. It adapted to these new conditions. Its legs, feet, and ear bones bring it closer to mammals than reptiles, even though it undoubtedly belongs to this group. Let's finish with the order that gave rise to the mammaliforms and soon to be mammals, the order of cynodonts. Let's take a closer look at Thrinaxodon. The teeth have evolved considerably and are now perfectly differentiated. The cranium is also enlarged at the back of the head. The zygomatic arch in the skull has also widened, bringing it closer to that of mammals and allowing for a more robust jaw musculature. But there's another important thing to discover about Thrinaxodon: the fur. At least that's what some scientists think. Thrinaxodon was undoubtedly an endothermic species. Before moving on to the second group, the sauropsids, which are also important in today's world, let's take a look at the 2 characteristics of cynodonts and diconodonts that scientists have recently discovered: dentition and thermoregulation. Decynodont means 2 dog teeth. This is an order of herbivores. In addition to its upper jaw tusks, the diconodont had a turtle-like beak, which it used to chew its food. The diconodont order was highly diversified, with members ranging in size from a rat to a large elephant. And speaking of elephants, many of today's animals have tusks, including elephants, walruses, and warthogs. These animals are all mammals. This was not necessarily the case at the time, however. as a new evolutionary process was clearly set in motion in these therapsids, which would later give rise to mammals. Tusks are defined by teeth that protrude from the mouth and grow continuously, as is the case with some dicynodonts. In this case, the tusks are made of dentine, but this is not the case with all dicynodonts, as some have no tusks but do have teeth. These teeth also have an interesting peculiarity to note about their composition. Here, it's not dentin, but hard enamel, a material also widely found in mammals. These are very large teeth, canines made of enamel. Dating analyses were carried out on 90 fossils as part of an international collaboration. These analyses brought to light a very important fact about two groups of therapsids, the diconodonts and the cynodonts. They were undoubtedly warm-blooded. Today, birds and mammals are the only animals capable not only of producing their own body heat, known as endothermy, but also of maintaining it at a constant high temperature, known as homeothermy. The combination of these two characteristics in mammals and birds is referred to as endohomeothermy. This invaluable characteristic, found in mammals today, is thought to have appeared in therapsids as early as the Upper Permian, between 252 and 259 million years ago. According to the study, 63 of the 90 fossils studied were therapsids of 22 different species, including dicynodonts and cynodonts. The researchers analyzed what is known as the isotopic composition of oxygen. A chemical element can take on different forms, known as an isotope, with a nucleus of different mass, depending on the different isotopes. In other words, an isotope is a kind of fingerprint of a chemical element under given conditions, in this case in relation to oxygen. Stable oxygen isotopes are incorporated differently into bones and teeth, depending on the animal's metabolism. By analyzing this data, we can determine whether they are cold-blooded or warm-blooded. In this way, the group of scientists was able to determine new evolutionary perspectives in two of our therapsids, since cynodonts and dicynodonts were probably warm-blooded and capable of endohomeothermy. Are the two related? It's hard to say for sure. Even so, the majority of terrestrial species will disappear as a result of the mass extinction that is fast approaching, with the exception of diconodonts and cynodonts in particular. The key to their resistance to abrupt climate change may lie precisely in their endohomeothermic capacity. These discoveries allow us to close the chapter on therapsids and the emergence of mammillomorphs. Over the course of evolution, these cynodont species gave rise to the mammilliforms, then in turn to the first mammals. So, with the origin of this group, our origins began millions of years ago in the Permian. Let's open another chapter with the sauropsids. Sauropsids are a clade of tetrapods and a sister group to the synapsids we've just seen. Together, they form the taxon Amniotes. Sauropsids are divided into several branches, including anapsids, which have no temporal fossae, and diapsids, which have two. Let's start with the parareptiles. These are diapsids that may well have lost their temporal fossae. Our very first reptile is not terrestrial but aquatic. To meet him, we'll have to leave the peacefulness of the forest to reach the large lake at our feet. It's a veritable fish pond here. Countless species of fish and other freshwater animals share the territory. Despite the apparent calm and the richness of the seabed covered in seaweed and other marine vegetation, danger is ever present. As we descend a little deeper into the water, we should cross paths with our famous Mesozoic. And here it is. With its meter-long, lanky form and long tail, it's impossible to mistake it for any other. It belongs to the anapsid reptile genus. It was one of the first reptiles to return to the water after the amphibians had left it to settle and evolve on land. Its nostrils are located on the top of its skull, enabling it to breathe with only the upper part of its head protruding, rather like our modern-day crocodiles. Its morphology suggests that it moved by undulating its body, but it was also capable of diving to the depths. Its thoracic cage is strong enough to allow this in any case. His ribs are banana-shaped and very thick. This means they can withstand the pressure of the water. This ability is very useful for feeding on the seabed. It hunted small crustaceans and other small prey, which it captured with its jaws, equipped with numerous elongated, fine, pointed teeth. Despite its great adaptation to the aquatic environment, Mesozoic may well have had to visit land during its lifetime, but only for one very special occasion: egg-laying. This would bring him closer to a way of life that we still see today in sea turtles. Like these turtles, the shape of its feet makes it very difficult to move around on land, and it is more at ease in the aquatic world. Like Periosaurus, Mesozoic belongs to the anapsid clade. Although both belong to the same class, they do not share the same ecological niche. This one is a terrestrial quadruped. So let's get out of these murky waters and onto dry land. This is Periosaurus nasicornis, one of the first of the Periosaurus genus. It's a large animal with a skull about 50 centimeters or 20 inches long. Its snout is fitted with a solid carapace. Periosaurus has many teeth, even on the palate. These are not useful for attacking meat, but rather plants. Its teeth are ideal for cutting hard plant fibers, as they are topped by cusps. Cusps are the sharp points at the top of the teeth's dentine. The Periosaurus family also includes Scutosaurus. Its name means shield reptile, in reference to its bony armor and the many spikes decorating its skull. It measures around 3 meters or 10 feet. As you can see, he's big, but also very heavy and imposing. However, his skeleton is not very well adapted to walking. It moves slowly and with little ease, so it's hardly surprising that more powerful reptiles such as Enostransevia or Gorgonopsian, whose path we've already crossed, easily overcame this large Scutosaurus. Its only defense was its muscular body and strong bones. Rows of hard, bony plates under his skin covered his powerful muscles. But this didn't dampen the ardor of the most reckless or the hungriest, as is clearly the case with this Enostransevia. Scutosaurus must undoubtedly have known the hunger in his belly, because in the semi-desert region where he found himself, there was very little vegetation. He must therefore travel many kilometers, often in the open, and therefore at the mercy of predators. When the precious plant treasure is finally within reach of its mouth, it uses its flattened teeth to crush the leaves and get to the bottom of the young branches. To digest, it is one of the so-called lithophagous animals. To digest plants, they ingest gastroliths, i.e. stomach stones. Stored in the gizzard or stomach, they facilitate the animal's digestion. Not all Permian sauropsids were large animals. Look at this one. We could have passed it by without even noticing its presence. So well does it blend into the background. This Procolophon is a small parareptile measuring around 30 centimeters or 12 inches and weighing just 2 kilograms or 5 pounds. It's rather stocky, as you can see, and scientists believe that its short, powerful legs helped it to dig burrows. To feed or protect itself from predators, nothing is less certain. It has several characteristics that tend to place it in all possible categories: vegetarian, insectivorous, and perhaps simply omnivorous. While this one is quietly enjoying his meal, we'll be taking a look at another group of sauropsids. The skulls of these amniotes have 2 temporal fossae, so we're talking about diapsid types. In sauropsids, as in synapsids, a new branch appears. A branch that little by little will also lead us to contemporary animals. The diapsid branch will in fact lead to several distinct evolutions. Ongoing studies and research sometimes contradict previous results, meaning that the classification of these animals is still a matter of debate. The diversification and evolutionary process is so broad that it's not always easy to make sense of it all. Let's take a look at the findings of some researchers and paleobiologists. The sauropsids are the origin of several lineages, or branches, which we're going to study in a little more depth. The testudines, diapsids, and archosauromorphs have many secrets to reveal about the evolution of living things. Let's start with testudines. It's through their study that scientists have been able to understand one of the evolutionary stages of diapsids. To understand the lineage of turtles, and therefore of testudines, we need to go back to the probable origins of this group, and that leads us to Unatosaurus. Unatosaurus africanus is a kind of prototorture. Its classification is still a matter of debate, with some scientists thinking that it too could be part of the large Periosaur family we saw a few minutes ago. Recent research, however, tends to refute this hypothesis, to which we'll return after a brief presentation of Unatosaurus. Many physical characteristics suggest that Unatosaurus was at the origin of the turtle branch. His silhouette and morphology suggest it, but it's his skeleton that will help to support this hypothesis. It has broad, elongated ribs that curve around its back and belly. It has 9 elongated trunk vertebrae, 9 pairs of broad T-shaped dorsal ribs, and 5 pairs of gastralia, bony dermal plates also known as ventral plastrons. With such a skeleton, it's easy to guess a form of protoclea that would later become a carapace. Unatosaurus was a burrowing animal. The evolution of its skeleton may well have been a response to its burrowing needs. To facilitate burrowing, the ribs widened and flattened. But protection from predators can't be ruled out either. Indeed, today's turtles have preserved and even improved this physical aptitude, whether or not they are burrowers. The prospect that it could also be a weapon of defense against predators is therefore entirely plausible. Swallowing a round animal with such a carapace is very difficult. Let's see what scientists have discovered about Unatosaurus. A team of researchers from Yale University in the USA have uncovered an interesting point about the evolution of these animals. In juvenile Unatosaurus, they have identified small openings characteristic of diapsid reptiles. In other words, 2 temporal fossae. Later, however, they closed. Unatosaurus became an anapsid. This means that anapsid testudines may have evolved from diapsid reptiles during the Permian period. If this is the case, then we can rule out the proposed origin of Periosaurus mentioned earlier. While turtles, the order of testudines, were previously considered to belong to the subclass Anaspidae, today some believe that testudines are diapsids that have lost their temporal fossae. For the moment, the question is still being debated by scientists, but these results favor the hypothesis that diapsids gave rise to anapsids. Speaking of diapsids, it's about time we met a few of them, don't you think? Diapsids are a sub-branch of sauropsids. While anapsids have no temporal fossae, diapsids have 2. Diapsids have a plurality of environments and niches. While many of the previous sauropsids live on land, the next one prefers large expanses of fresh water. Hovasaurus is much smaller than our earlier Mesosaurus, but he has much to teach us. He is just 50 centimeters or 20 inches long. Its tail alone accounts for half its total length. Its tail is flattened on both sides, probably enabling it to swim by undulating its body. The lateral undulations of the tail could in fact provide sufficient propulsive thrust to move the whole body. In a way, it resembles a lanky marine iguana. Surprisingly, paleontologists have also found stones in its stomach. This is quite common in vegetarians to aid digestion. But Hovasaurus is not a herbivore. It is a piscivorous fish eater. Stones like these therefore raise further questions. It may well be that despite this diet, Hovasaurus used gastroliths to aid digestion. But for some scientists, another answer is possible. They were useful for diving. He would swallow these stones to dive faster when hunting. Gastroliths are found near the abdominal cavity, a soft tissue membrane specially designed to contain them. Given the location of these stones, this means that Hovasaurus's center of gravity is at the rear. In these circumstances, a rearward placed center of gravity would undoubtedly have increased forward thrust through the sinuous movement of the tail, enabling it to dive more easily. Hovasaurus was therefore an animal that could reach a certain depth. The way it swam and its diet are among the clues that enable researchers to advance this hypothesis. But they are not the only ones. Another fact also supports this hypothesis. This time it's its skeleton. The study of fossils reveals Brachiosaurus in this animal. This is a bone specialization often found in amniotes secondarily adapted to aquatic environments. The bones undergo a thickening, generally caused by additional layers of lamellar bone, which increases the animal's weight, like a kind of ballast. This increases speed and depth, as well as swimming ability. This diapsid, therefore, develops more and more skills to adapt to new living conditions. Let's continue our investigations with another family. If there's one diapsid family not to be missed, it's the Archosauromorph family. As we've seen, sauropsids gave rise to diapsids. The latter have left their mark on Earth's history, and some of their descendants are still part of our lives today. In fact, among these diapsids, we see the appearance of those grouped together in the Permian under the name of Archosauromorphs. They form one of the keys to the evolution of contemporary species. After the Archosauromorphs came the Archosauriforms and Archosaurians, from which came dinosaurs, flying reptiles, and even birds. Once again, many of our contemporary species originated here in the Permian. Let's hear what these Archosauromorphs have to say. Brachiosaurus is the oldest of its kind known to scientists. He's a bit special, I must admit. This insectivore does indeed resemble a lizard, but with long legs and a disproportionately long neck. This morphology, surprising as it is, seems to be more of an asset than anything else. Given its musculature and legs, it's safe to assume that we're dealing here with a fast-moving reptile. Towards the end of the Permian, these Archosauromorphs gave rise to the Archosauriforms. This category includes Proterosaurus fergusi. It was a predator and undoubtedly one of the largest terrestrial reptiles of its time. It measures almost 3 meters or 10 feet. Its long legs are perfectly designed for running. When it's chasing prey, it looks even more formidable. This herd of Lystrosaurus gently crossing the stream should be on its guard. This small herbivore is a burrowing animal of the order Synapsidae. It is a diconodont. Its stocky body, sturdy limbs, and famous pair of tusks on its upper jaw will be far from enough to cope with the mighty Proterosaurus lying in ambush. It feeds on fish, reptiles, and other animals of varying size that come to drink at the waterhole. He occupies this watering hole patiently, waiting for an opportunity to present itself. Like the crocodile, ambush defines its hunting strategy. Proterosaurus shares other characteristics with the crocodile, although there are also many differences. Like crocodiles, Proterosaurus has powerful jaws with conical teeth. Neck muscles complement its armada of sharp teeth, enabling it to open and close its mouth very quickly. He is impressive, even from a distance. It also has short muscular legs, but unlike crocodiles, they offer greater ease on the ground. So perhaps to a lesser extent, it also hunted on the ground. What crocodiles don't have either, unlike our Proterosaurus, is a hook-shaped, downward-pointing premaxilla on its upper jaw, which is very useful for slippery prey. It also has a few trump cards to play if it and its descendants, or at least the various evolutions that will follow, are to survive. It is able to cope with extreme situations. For example, some researchers believe that it stores fat in its tail and can go for months without eating. When prey is in short supply, it can hold out for long periods. It is also able to regulate its body temperature by alternating between sunbathing and bathing in cool water. Here again, given that the Permian continents were in a completely different position, with its habitat closer to the South Pole, it was able to acclimatize more easily to the changing seasons. Our Archosauriform thus opened the door to future Archosaurians and later dinosaurs, crocodiles, and birds. While future Archosaurians prepare to make their grand entrance on the scene, other reptiles have also adopted interesting new abilities. Before parading through the air, reptiles have gone through several intermediate phases. Predators on the ground are increasingly ferocious and cut out to attack any species. Pelycosaurs, for example, are widely present on the continent. Smaller reptiles don't stand a chance, unless they manage to conquer another environment. And that's exactly what some will do. A new environment is the only solution. So they've become arboreal. They live in trees, particularly in the canopy. This zone is richer in light, but also in insects of all kinds. In other words, there's an abundance of food to feed these new arrivals. Meet Coelurosaurus. It has an elongated, flattened body. It measures around 40 centimeters or 16 inches and blends easily into this landscape in the heart of the canopy. Coelurosaurus's special feature is, of course, the membrane on its sides that enables it to glide. These membranes are not wings per se. They are supported by bony rays of dermal origin and involve neither ribs nor limbs. When it spreads and stretches its upper limbs, this action stretches the membranes that enable it to glide. According to paleobiologists, its ancestor must have jumped from branch to branch to move from one tree to another. In this way, he avoided taking too many risks on the ground. Evolution would later give him the ability to glide between two trees, gaining in agility. It doesn't fly yet. Coelurosaurus only glides, but it opens up new perspectives, those of the conquest of the sky by reptiles. Despite all these radiations and great biological revolutions, the Permian also marks the end of an era, that of the Paleozoic. A mass extinction is underway and will once again upset the order of living things. Many Permian animals will not reach the next era, the Triassic. A new system, the Mesozoic, begins. Before entering this new period, the world will face a major fracture, one that will leave its mark on the Permian and Triassic eras. Pangea will break up again. Yes, it's not the first time that the Earth's internal activity has beaten time and played its most beautiful symphony, the waltz of the continents. This waltz continues, but this time it's no longer about unification, but separation. The North Atlantic Ocean will open up, causing the continent to break up. This fracturing of the land will lead to major changes to which not all species will be able to adapt. Several factors combined over several million years will lead to the disappearance of almost 90% of marine and terrestrial species. It's a chain reaction that will undermine the very cycle of life itself. The food chain breaks down, a domino effect that will impact every member of this chain, notably 75% of terrestrial vertebrates, but also the majority of marine animals. Water contains methane hydrate, also known as clathrate. Until now, it has been in solid form. Pressure and low temperatures have enabled methane hydrate to maintain this state. As the temperature rises, it becomes gaseous, releasing the methane. If carbon dioxide is a powerful greenhouse gas, methane is even more dangerous because it is even more powerful than CO2. It heats up the water. The ocean gains 10 degrees. This is enormous. The marine breeding ground is transformed into a veritable aquatic hell. The heat also has an effect on the oxygen present in the water. If a few animals had managed to cope with the new temperatures, the lack of oxygen, the anoxia finishes them off, leaving them no chance of survival. 96% of marine species disappear. Some seabeds are weakened by plate movements, but also by areas where the Earth's mantle has not regenerated sufficiently. The ground is so fragile in places that it causes the ocean floor to collapse in on itself. The sea level will then drop by 250 meters or 820 feet. Where the sea once fringed the coastline, kilometers of bare land appear. The animals benefiting from the waters of the continental shelf will disappear, along with their ecosystem and their best way of life. There is also the hypothesis that meteorites hit the Earth in the Permian, one in Australia and the other in Antarctica, with terrible consequences. But it's difficult, almost 250 million years later, to be certain of the latter. In Siberia, huge quantities of magma are rising to the surface. The ground opens up, even tears for dozens and dozens of kilometers. When a lava flow takes on such proportions, we speak of traps, basaltic flows, or massive basaltic flows. This flow will last for almost 1 million years. Dust spills onto the ground, but it also invades the sky, as does the gas released in the aftermath of eruptions. As gas and dust accumulate in the sky, the atmosphere becomes stifling. The greenhouse effect and global warming are becoming increasingly serious. It's also possible that the sulfur dioxide contained in the gases has moved into the clouds. If this is the case, the rains that fall are no longer heaven-sent water, but acid rain. If this were the case, such rain would have ravaged vegetation all over the continent, polluted the waters, deprived plant-eating creatures of food, and then carnivores after them. It's a giant inferno that sweeps away everything in its path, but whose consequences extend far beyond the volcanic region itself. For thousands of kilometers, it would take several tens of millions of years for life to take its revenge and fully reinvest both the ocean and the continent. Join us in the next era to discover how life managed to resist and renew itself as we approach the very first period of the Mesozoic, the Triassic.